is the feature of the film for Christmas Day.
In 1972, three friends from Christopher Wren Boys School decided to start a band. They named themselves The Strand after a Roxy Music song.
To the Strand, love, when you feel love.
Within 2 years, they were regularly practicing in an abandoned BBC sound studio using copies of keys the drummer swiped from his electrician father who was working at the studio. They later picked up a steady bass player who worked part-time at a hipster clothing store that served as a hangout for the local teenagers. The lineup of this group, now called the Swankers, consisted of Wally Nightingale on guitar, Steve Jones on vocals, Paul Cook on drums, and Glenn Matlock on bass. When Jones learned that the owner of the hipster boutique was involved with the New York Dolls, he asked the shopkeeper to manage his band.
What's your band called?
The Swankers.
Wankers?
The Swankers. It's edgy.
Are you queer?
No.
Malcolm McLaren set out to mold and shape the band into something new. His first order of business was to remove Nightingale. Jones moved to guitar, and John Lydon was invited to audition as the new lead singer for Cutie Jones and his Sex Pistols. With Johnny Rotten at the helm and McLaren on the rudder, the Sex Pistols, sans Cutie, set out to shock and offend the world, or at least England. They started at St. Martin's School of Art, where Matlock was a student. They opened for Bazooka Joe, and Jones, who was under the influence of Quaaludes, cranked up his 100-watt amp in the tiny common room.
That was ridiculous.
They pulled the plug on us after about 5 songs, says Jones, but the next gig, all that crowd was there again. It was full steam ahead as they spread their message of chaos and destruction throughout the nation, starting fights, alienating peers, and earning bans throughout Greater London. They made international headlines by crashing the Queen's Jubilee celebration and cursing out a drunken news anchor on live TV.
Dirty bastard.
Matlock was forced out.
They can't fire me, I quit!
And replaced by the talentless Ken doll of a punk, Sid Vicious. They came to be known as the most controversial band in England.
Well, it may not be the greatest rock and roll in the world, but it's certainly the most controversial.
And on Christmas Day 1977, they played a double-header benefit for the families of striking firefighters. Hi everybody, Brendan here with another edition of This Month in Punk Rock History. It's December 2023, and this month in punk rock history, we take a look at the day the Sex Pistols gave back to the community by playing 2 charity shows at Ivanhoe's nightclub in Huddersfield, West Yorkshire, on December 25th, 1977. But first...
Ho, 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 everyone. If you want a last-minute gift that probably won't arrive on time, check out the Sweet Jimmy Network's eBay store. A lot of cool stuff, including most of my holiday ornaments. I'm selling them off because there is no God.
It's a pop culture bonanza of ornaments and a wide variety of Christmas albums. Check it out. That's the Sweet Jimmy Network eBay store. Just link in the description.
Britain entered the 1970s with a strong economy. Still riding the post-war manufacturing and export high, unemployment for the most part of the first half of the decade was at a record low. And then, the Yom Kippur War of October 1973 saw crude oil quadruple in price. Around the same time, coal production's steady decline sharply worsened, and manufacturing declined. Suddenly, the country found itself facing a recession, and corporations responded with layoffs, pay freezes, and price hikes. Coal miners were on strike, and the Conservative government imposed a 3-day workweek to conserve energy.
Look. Look, are you going to cook my dinner?
No, I told you I'm on a 3-day week. Here, Rita, they said on the telly that 3-day week's costing them over £40 million a week. Mine isn't. I'm saving, because if I'm not going to cook it, I don't need to buy it.
In 1974, the Conservative government was replaced by Labour, who promised a social contract which called for greater state control of wages and improved welfare policies in exchange for nationalization of several industries. Labour never delivered on their promise. Inflation jumped to nearly 27%, and workers demanded higher wages. In 1977, the national average wage of adult male workers was £78.60 for a basic 42-hour workweek. Firefighters earn an average of £65.70 after a 4-year training period, and a firefighter's typical workweek was 48 hours, often comprised of 15-hour nights and 9-hour days. So, firefighters were paid almost £13 below average, whereas only 6 years before, they earned over £2 more.
London's burning, London's burning.
In November that year, the Fire Brigades Union authorized its first ever national strike.
Fetch the engine, fetch the engine.
As a government service, salary increases were capped at 10%, part of Labour's money-saving plan. But the 30,000-strong union demanded 30%. While the firefighters picketed, military servicemen were called in and with minimal training and inadequate equipment offered a poor substitute for proper fire brigades.
Fire, 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 fire.
Meanwhile, only days after the strike was called, Chris Seal, manager of Virgin Records store in Nottingham, was cleared of charges of indecency stemming from a poster for the Sex Pistols album Nevermind the Bollocks. At issue was the use of the word bollocks and whether or not it was obscene. Known as a colloquialism for male anatomy, the head of the English department at University of Nottingham testified that the word had been commonly used since the Anglo-Saxons and had appeared in the Bible, veterinary texts, and as a word for clergymen who ran their mouths. The court reluctantly found Seal, and by extension the Sex Pistols, not guilty. It was a much-needed victory for the Sex Pistols, who were beginning to succumb to the pressures of being the first big punk rock band in England. The album, which had only been released about a month before this trial, was the #1 selling LP in the country, but left off the printed charts and banned by the BBC. While controversy may breed cash, it became difficult to find gigs on their home turf. That year they embarked on a clandestine tour of the UK under various pseudonyms for what was called the Sex Pistols on Tour Secretly, or SPOTS tour. After that, they spent some time in the Netherlands before returning home for a very limited winter tour with lifted bands in exchange for limited advertising. They were, as one headline puts it, enemies of the world. Despite assurances made, venues were still reluctant to book the group, known for exaggerated tales of projectile vomiting and violence. Rotten also suffered a bout of laryngitis, which didn't help matters. Manager Malcolm McLaren was finding difficulty securing domestic Christmas holiday season dates to close out the year before heading to the US for the tour that broke the band, when he reached out to a booking agent named Bill Wright. Wright tells author Ian Clayton that he was initially reluctant to book the band because of their reputation, but was convinced when McLaren evoked images of the woefully inadequate Green Goddess Army trucks screaming down the road and proposed a fundraiser for the striking Fire Brigade Union. The proposal was a matinee kids party with sandwiches, cakes, games, and prizes, and a proper grown-up gig later that evening. Wright liked the idea and the show was booked. Glitterbest, the business side of all things Sex Pistol, and their label Virgin Records teamed up with the Gingerbread Group, an organization benefiting single-parent households, to charter buses which would pick up the young guests from their homes and take them to the party at Ivanhoe's nightclub. Steve Jones remembers arriving in Huddersfield for the gig and finding the town, quote, grim, very grim. Paul Cook says it was dark and desolate, but
there was a lot of warmth there when we got there from everyone. The firemen were there waiting for us. Everyone was really pleased to see us.
Cook, Jones, Vicious, and Rotten played 2 shows, a matinee for the children and an evening performance open to all, with proceeds to benefit the striking firefighters. Rotten recalled the event as, quote, heaven personified. We were so hated at that time, but we were in touch with the young kids. Paul Cook referred to it as the band's own Christmas party, remembering a very relaxed atmosphere with all band infighting suspended for at least the day. Maybe it was just the Christmas spirit, remarked the drummer. One young attendee who later wrote about the event for the Guardian newspaper recalled Johnny Rotten cutting and soon throwing pieces of an enormous Sex Pistols cake. Julian Temple's footage of the event shows Rotten face planting into the 3-foot sheet cake in the middle of Pretty Vacant without missing a beat. Rotten engaged the young audience, offering the mic to the very young crowd on several occasions. Rotten tells archivist Julian Temple that Sid Vicious found difficulty in loosening his grip on the hardened punk persona that typical audiences had come to expect. Rotten says Vicious required frequent reminders of the purpose and the audience of that show. Temple recalls hearing that Vicious was largely out of public view during the kids' party, either sulking in the dressing room or getting emotional support from girlfriend Nancy Spungen. Sex Pistols merchandise, including pins, stickers, t-shirts, records, and skateboards, were given to the children. McLaren had flyers printed extolling the band as Dickensian ragamuffins and himself their Pied Piper. The second half of the doubleheader was played a few hours later for the grown-ups. Rotten and Cook say the kids' show was to an extent self-censored,
and we'd have to play 7-year-olds. There's an awful lot you have to leave at the door.
But the adult gig was no holds barred.
We're all fucking drunk, just like you should be. Up here. You gonna have a good time or what? How else can you avoid Christmas but for a bottle of fucking booze? Can you think of a better way to spend Christmas?
This set was arguably the Pistols at their finest. Unbeknownst to anyone that day, Huddersfield would be the last time the Pistols performed on UK soil until their reunion in 1996. 11 days after Huddersfield, the Pistols played their first American gig. 2 weeks later, they played their last.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated? Good night.
The Firefighters Benefit Show was recorded at the mixing board and widely bootlegged, but to date never officially released. Some of Julian Temple's footage of the night was included in his 2000 documentary The Filth and the Fury. More of this footage was compiled for the BBC documentary Never Mind the Baubles in 2013. 9 weeks after the Fire Brigades Union walked off the job, they declared the strike over on January 16, 1978, settling for a 10% raise and a 42-hour work week. It was a far from perfect deal, but it got the Fire Brigades back to work for another 25 years without a strike. Details of how much money was donated to the FBU are difficult to come by.
Take this money and don't come back.
But the event clearly made a difference in the lives of the young attendees. A researcher working for Ian Clayton managed to track down some of the kids who were at the show. One boy, now a grown man and firefighter himself, won a Sex Pistols skateboard. He told the researcher it was the only gift he received that year. So that's it for our look at the Sex Pistols' Christmas in Huddersfield, 1977. Happy Christmas, everybody. My gift to Jimmy this year was a shorter video. What are you hoping to receive in your holiday of choice? Let me know in the comments section. And come back in January when we ponder, how could hell be any worse? In the meantime, dig through my archives via tiprh.start.page. For this month in punk rock history, I'm Brendan McCabe.
We'll always have Huddersfield.
There might be a copyright infringement.
These bears may look sweet and innocent, but if I just make a slight adjustment... Now they're sexual deviants. Happy holidays from the Sweet Jimmy Network.